The knock came at dusk, solid and deliberate, the kind that said someone had walked a long way to arrive at this particular door. Finneas Ellsworth set down the primer he had been mending and crossed the schoolroom, his boots echoing on floorboards he had sanded himself 3 summers past. He was not expecting visitors. The children had gone home hours ago, their voices fading down the dusty road that wound between wheat fields and copses of oak. He opened the door and found himself looking at a woman whose green skin caught the last amber light of day, whose dark eyes held recognition he felt like a fist around his ribs. "You promised you would wait for me," she said. The words hung between them. Finneas felt his damaged hand, the 2 fingers that no longer bent properly curl reflexively against his thigh. He knew her, not from yesterday or last year, but from before. From a time when this schoolhouse had been smaller, when the war had been just a rumor adults whispered about after the children were dismissed. "Elara," he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Elara Stonefield," she confirmed. She stood with her shoulders squared, her traveling cloak dusty from the road. She was taller than she had been as a girl, though not unusually so, perhaps 5.5 feet to his 6. Her tusks were small, barely visible when her mouth was closed, but he remembered when she had been self-conscious about them, covering her smile with her hand during lessons. "You remember?" "I remember," he said. The door was still between them, half open. He stepped back. "Come in." She entered slowly, looking around the schoolroom as though cataloging every change. The desks were newer, built to replace the ones that had burned when the border conflict reached this valley. The walls bore maps he had drawn himself, careful representations of the surrounding territories with their rivers and roads. The smell of chalk dust and linseed oil permeated everything. "You rebuilt it," Elara said. "We rebuilt it. The community." Finneas closed the door. The autumn chill was beginning to settle. 5 years ago now. "And you teach here?" "I do." She turned to face him fully, and he saw the tension in her jaw, the way her hands remained still at her sides as though she were forcing them not to move. "You never married." It was not a question, but he answered anyway. "No." "Why not?" Finneas walked past her to the small stove in the corner and began stoking the fire that had burned low. It gave him something to do with his hands. "You know why?" "I need to hear you say it." He straightened, brushing ash from his palms. His hearing was worse in his left ear, the one that had been too close to the cannon blast that had also taken the mobility from his fingers. He had learned to position himself so people spoke to his right side, an unconscious accommodation. "Because I made a promise to a girl who carved her initials into that beam," he gestured to the ceiling, "and told me to wait for her." Elara followed his gesture. The beam was old oak, one of the few structural elements that had survived the fire. The initials were still there, weathered but deliberate. E.S. Below them, carved in a different hand years later, were the letters F.E. "You added yours," she said softly, "so people would know I meant it." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable precisely, but it was heavy with things neither of them had said. Finneas gestured to the chair behind his desk. "Sit. Tell me why you have come back now." Elara sat, though she moved as though her body remembered being ready to run. "My family was driven off our land 12 years ago. We went north, to the territories beyond the river where the clans still hold autonomy. My father died 3 years past. My mother 2 years after that. My brothers have families of their own now, scattered across 3 settlements." "I am sorry," Finneas said, and meant it. "The war is over," Elara continued. "The treaties were signed 4 years ago. There are provisions for restitution, for families to reclaim land that was taken during the conflict, but the process requires testimony, records." proof that the land was ours before the dispute began. Understanding settled over Finneas like a familiar coat. The boundary surveys. Yes, Elara leaned forward. Our claim was legitimate. My grandfather had a grant from the territorial governor before the borders shifted and everything became contested. But the records were burned when the regional office was destroyed. Without documentation, the land office will not hear our petition. You need a witness who remembers the old boundaries. I need you, Elara said. You were the boundary keeper's apprentice. Your uncle had you memorize every property line in this valley before the war. Finneas had not thought about his uncle in years. Duncan Ellsworth had been a meticulous man, obsessed with accuracy to the point of tedium. He had made young Finneas recite coordinates and landmarks until the boy could draw the entire valley from memory. At the time, it had seemed like torture. My uncle died in the second year of the war. I know, I heard. Elara's voice was gentle. But you remember, do not you? You remember where our land began and ended. He did. He could close his eyes and see it. The Stonefield property had stretched from the split oak by the creek, north to the ridge where the white stones emerged from the hillside, west to the old drover's road, and east to the boundary marked by 3 cairns his uncle had built himself. 67 acres of good farmland with a southern exposure and a reliable spring. I remember, he said. Relief washed over Elara's face, softening the hard lines of determination. Then you will testify. The land office is hearing claims in 3 weeks at the county seat. If you come with me, if you can give them the details, we can reclaim what was ours. Finneas sat on the edge of his desk, his bad hand resting in his lap. They will listen to me. A human testifying on behalf of an orc family's claim. They have to listen to factual testimony about property boundaries. The law requires it. Elara paused. But you are right that your word will carry weight mine would not. That is why I need you. You need me because I am human, and the land office trusts humans more than orcs. Yes, Elara said bluntly. That is exactly why. I am not proud of it, but I am practical. Finneas appreciated her honesty. He had spent 4 years as a soldier, and he had seen what the war had done to both peoples. The prejudice ran deep, coded into laws and customs that claimed to be neutral but never were. I will testify, he said. You have my word. Elara stood, and for a moment he thought she might embrace him, but she only extended her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused. Thank you. Where are you staying? Finneas asked. I have a room at the inn outside town. They allow orc travelers, though they charge extra. She said it without bitterness, as though it were simply a fact of the world. Stay here, Finneas said. The words came out before he had fully thought them through, but once spoken, he did not want to take them back. I have a room in the back. You can have it. I will sleep in the schoolroom. Elara hesitated. That would cause talk. Let it. Finneas crossed his arms. You are here on legitimate business, and I am offering you hospitality. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. A smile tugged at the corner of Elara's mouth, the first real one he had seen. You have become stubborn. I learned from the best. He remembered her as a child, refusing to back down when the older boys mocked her accent, standing her ground until they lost interest and wandered away. I will stay, Elara said, but only for a few days, until we can make arrangements to travel to the county seat. Then it is settled. Finneas moved to the back room and began clearing his belongings. The space was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a washstand. He gathered his spare clothes and his few books. There is a pump outside for water. I will bring in wood for the stove. Elara followed him, carrying her traveling pack. Finneas. He turned. Thank you, she said again. Not just for the testimony, for keeping your promise, for waiting. He wanted to say something eloquent, something that would encompass the 12 years that had passed, the ways the war had changed them both, the fact that he had thought of her more often than he cared to admit. Instead he said, "I told you I would." That night, Finneas lay on a bedroll in the schoolroom and listened to the familiar creaks and settlings of the building. Through the thin wall, he could hear Elara moving about, the sound of water being poured, the rustle of fabric. He stared at the ceiling beam with their carved initials and tried to reconcile the woman who had appeared on his doorstep with the girl he had known. They had been children together for 3 years, from the time Elara's family moved to the valley until the war scattered them. She had been quick with numbers, better than him at sums, and she had taught him phrases in the Orc tongue that he had long since forgotten. He had shared his lunch with her on days when her family was struggling, and she had shown him how to identify edible plants in the woods behind the school. The promise had been made on her last day when her family was packing to leave. They had stood together behind the schoolhouse, away from the adults who were arguing about compensation and safe passage. Elara had been crying, though she tried to hide it. "I will come back," she had said fiercely. "When the war is over and everything is settled, I will come back." "I will be here," Finneas had replied, with the certainty of a boy who had never been anywhere else. "Promise me. Promise you will wait. I promise." She had taken out her pocket knife and carved her initials into the beam that supported the schoolhouse overhang, the wood soft enough to take the marks easily. Then she had pressed the knife into his hand. "Keep this, so you remember." He still had it, tucked in the drawer of his desk. Morning came with pale light and the sound of roosters from the neighboring farm. Finneas woke stiff from sleeping on the floor, his bad hand aching the way it always did in damp weather. He rose and rekindled the stove, setting water to boil for tea. When Elara emerged from the back room, her hair was braided and she looked more rested than she had the night before. "Good morning," she said. "Morning. I am making tea. There is bread from yesterday, and I can fry some eggs if you are hungry." "I can cook," Elara offered. They moved around the small kitchen area with an ease that surprised Finneas. Elara found the skillet and the eggs without needing to ask where things were kept. She cracked 4 eggs into the pan with practiced efficiency while he sliced bread and set out butter and jam. "You live simply," Elara observed. "I do not need much. The community pays me a small salary and I have the schoolhouse. It is enough." They ate at the table he used for preparing lessons, the silence comfortable. Outside, the sound of wagons and voices signaled the start of the day as farmers headed to their fields. "Tell me about the students," Elara said. "How many do you teach?" 14 at the moment, ranging from 6 years old to 13. "They come from the farms around here mostly. A few from town." "Any Orc children?" Finneas shook his head. "There are not many Orc families left in this valley. Most moved north during the war and never came back." "Because they were not welcome," Elara said quietly. "No," Finneas agreed. "They were not." Elara set down her fork. "Does that bother you? Teaching only human children when you know there are Orc families in the territories who could use a school?" "Yes," Finneas said. "It bothers me a great deal, but I am one man with one schoolhouse. I do what I can. You could do more." "How?" Elara met his eyes. "If my family reclaims our land, we will not be the only ones. There are others waiting to see if the treaties actually mean anything, if the restitution process is real or just words on paper. If we succeed, more families will come back, and those families will have children." Finneas understood what she was suggesting. "You want the schoolhouse to serve both communities." "I want it to be what it was when we were children, before the war made everything separate and hostile. You taught Orc and human children together then. You could again. It would not be easy." "There would be resistance." "From whom?" Elara challenged. You said yourself the community respects you. You served in the war. You rebuilt this place. If you say orc children are welcome, who will argue? More people than you think, Finneas said, but he was already turning the idea over in his mind. But you are right that it should be tried. Then try. They finished breakfast and Elara helped him clean up. Afterward, Finneas brought out the maps and documents he had been collecting, materials that detailed the old property boundaries as he remembered them. He spread them across the desk and began walking Elara through the details of her family's land. The split oak is still there, he said, pointing to a mark on the map. I checked 3 years ago when I was surveying for the new well. The white stones on the ridge are still visible. The drover's road has been rerouted, but the old path is still clear enough to follow. The cairns, I do not know if they survived. My brother and I can rebuild them if needed, Elara said. He is coming south to meet us at the county seat. Which brother? Tomas, the eldest. He is a surveyor now, works for the territorial land office up north. He knows how to document boundaries properly. They worked through the morning, Finneas sketching details from memory while Elara took notes. He had forgotten how much he had retained, how the years of his uncle's drilling had embedded the information so deeply that it came back with startling clarity. Acreage, bearings, landmark descriptions, it all poured out as though his uncle were standing over his shoulder, demanding precision. You are certain of these measurements? Elara asked at one point. Yes. My uncle checked them 3 times before recording them. He was obsessive about accuracy. That obsessiveness is going to save my family's claim. Around midday, a knock at the door interrupted them. Finneas opened it to find a woman holding a young boy by the hand. She was one of the local farmers' wives, a stout woman named Margaret who had 2 children in Finneas's class. Master Ellsworth, she said. Then her eyes fell on Elara, who had risen from the desk. Margaret's expression tightened. I did not realize you had company. This is Elara Stonefield, Finneas said evenly. She is here on business regarding a land claim. Elara, this is Margaret Thorne. Madam, Elara said politely. Margaret did not respond to the greeting. Instead, she turned back to Finneas. I came to ask if you could help young Thomas with his reading. He is falling behind, and I thought perhaps some extra tutoring. Of course, Finneas said. Bring him by tomorrow afternoon after regular lessons. We can work on his letters. Thank you. Margaret's gaze flicked to Elara once more, openly suspicious. I will let you get back to your business. After she left, Finneas closed the door and leaned against it. That will be all over town by nightfall. That you are harboring a dangerous orc woman in the schoolhouse. Elara's tone was light, but there was an edge beneath it, something like that. I can stay at the inn, Elara offered. I do not want to cause trouble for you. No, Finneas pushed away from the door. You are staying here. I meant what I said last night. Let people talk. It will not change anything. It might, Elara said. If the community decides you are too sympathetic to orcs, they might stop sending their children to you. You could lose your position. Then I will find another position. He was surprised by his own vehemence. I am not turning you out to satisfy people's prejudices. Elara studied him for a long moment. You really have been waiting, have you not, all these years? Yes. Why? The question was soft. I was a child when I left. You were a child. That promise was made by people who did not understand what they were promising. Finneas moved back to the desk, running his good hand along the edge. Do you remember the day before you left when we went to the creek to catch minnows? I remember. You told me that you were afraid you would forget things. Forget what the valley looked like, what the schoolhouse smelled like. Forget me. He looked up at her. I told you I would make sure you did not have to forget, because I would be here, keeping everything the same. That was not just about the promise to wait. It was about making sure there was still a place for you to come back to. Elara's eyes were bright. And you did. You kept this place alive. I tried. She crossed the distance between them and took his damaged hand in both of hers, her touch gentle on the scarred fingers. What happened to your hand? Cannon fire. 4th year of the war during the siege at Brenton Ridge. And your ear, the same. Does it hurt? Sometimes. When the weather turns, it is not so bad. Elara did not let go. I heard stories about the war, even in the north, about how brutal it was, how many died. I used to wonder if you were alive, if you had been conscripted, if you were fighting, if you were. She stopped. I wondered. I survived, Finneas said simply. A lot of people did not. Do you ever talk about it, what you saw, what you did? No. The word came out harsher than he intended. He pulled his hand back, not roughly but firmly. There is nothing to talk about. Elara did not push, but he could see the questions in her eyes. Instead, she said, "We should prepare for the journey to the county seat. It is a 3-day ride from here. We will need supplies." They spent the afternoon planning. Finneas would need to arrange for someone to cover his teaching duties while he was gone. Elara needed to send word to her brother about when and where to meet. They made lists, checked Finneas's maps again, and went over the testimony he would need to give. As the sun began to set, Finneas walked to the neighboring farm to speak with Samuel Hart, a retired schoolteacher who sometimes helped with lessons. Samuel was a grizzled man in his 60s, with a sharp mind and a generous spirit. "You need me to teach for a few days?" Samuel asked, leaning on his hoe. "A week at most. I have to travel to the county seat for a land claim testimony." "What claim?" "The Stonefield property. You remember them, the Orc family that had the farm on the North Ridge." Samuel's expression did not change, but his voice grew careful. "I remember. Their daughter was in your class. She came back. She is petitioning to reclaim her family's land, and I am the only one who can testify to the old boundaries." "That's so." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "You know there are people who will not like this." "I know." "You are sticking your neck out for an Orc family's claim. That is going to make some folks uneasy." "It is the right thing to do," Finneas said. "The land was theirs. The records prove it, and my testimony proves it. That should be enough." Samuel nodded slowly. "I will cover your classes." "You do what you need to do. Just be careful, Finneas. The war ended, but the feelings did not." "I know that too." Walking back to the schoolhouse, Finneas felt the weight of the decision settling over him. Samuel was right, there would be consequences. But he had made a promise, not just to Elara, but to the boy he had been, who believed that fairness mattered more than fear. That evening, he and Elara ate a simple dinner of soup and bread. Afterward, they sat by the stove, the firelight casting long shadows across the room. "Tell me about your life in the north," Finneas said. "What was it like?" Elara pulled her knees to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. "Harder than here. The land is rockier, the growing season shorter, but the clans took us in and we learned to adapt. My father worked as a mason. My mother took in sewing. My brothers and I did whatever needed doing, farm work, carpentry, tanning. We survived. Did you go to school?" "For a while. There was a teacher in the settlement, an old Orc woman who had been a scholar before the war. She taught me to read and write in both the common tongue and the Orc language. She is the one who told me about the restitution provisions in the treaty. She said I should come back and fight for our land. She sounds wise. She was. She died last winter." Elara's voice softened. "She made me promise I would not let fear keep me from claiming what was ours. So here I am." "Here you are," Finneas echoed. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling. Then Elara said, "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you never marry, really? I know you made a promise to a child, but that should not have bound you for 12 years. You could have moved on, made a life with someone else." Finneas stared into the flames. I thought about it. There were women who made it clear they were interested. Good women, kind women. But every time I considered it, I would think about you, about the promise, and it felt wrong to break it, even if you never came back. That is loyalty beyond reason. Maybe, or maybe I just did not want to regret wondering what would have happened if I had waited. Elara was quiet for so long that Finneas thought she might not respond. Then she said, I fell in love with you when I was 10 years old. I did not know that was what it was at the time. I just knew that you were the one person who never treated me like I was less because I was an orc. You shared your lunch, you helped me with my reading, you stood up for me when the other children were cruel, and when I had to leave, I thought my heart would break. Finneas turned to look at her. You were 10. I know. And I am not saying that what a 10-year-old feels is the same as what an adult feels. But that feeling never went away. It changed, it grew up, but it stayed. Every time I thought about coming home, I thought about you, about whether you would even remember me, about whether you had kept your promise. I kept it, I know. Elara smiled, and there was something tremulous in it. And now I am here, and I do not know what to do with that, because you are not the boy I remember. You are a man who has been through war and loss, who has built a life without me. And I am not the girl who left. I am someone who has lived in exile, who has learned to be hard when I need to be. We are strangers, Finneas, even though we are not. He understood what she was saying. There was a distance between them, a gap carved by years and experience. But there was also something that had endured, a thread that connected the children they had been to the adults they had become. Then we learn each other again, Finneas said. We have time. Do we? After the testimony, after the land is reclaimed, I will have to return north to gather my family to organize the move back. That will take months. And you have your teaching, your responsibilities here. I will still be here when you come back. Elara laughed, a sound that was half sob. You are impossible. I promised. She reached out and took his hand again, the good one this time, her fingers lacing through his. Then I am holding you to it. Again. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Finneas arranged for supplies, double-checked his maps, and made sure Samuel was prepared to take over the classes. Elara sent word to her brother and reviewed the legal documents she had brought with her, making notes on what would be needed for the petition. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side during the day and talking by the fire at night. Finneas found himself telling her stories about the students, about the families in the valley, about the small dramas and joys of schoolhouse life. Elara told him about the northern settlements, about the clans and their customs, about the friends she had made and lost. There was one subject they did not discuss, the war itself. Whenever the conversation drifted close to it, one or the other would steer away, as though by unspoken agreement. Finneas did not want to revisit the things he had seen and done, and he sensed that Elara carried her own weight from those years. On the evening before they were set to leave, Finneas was locking up the schoolhouse when he heard voices outside. He stepped out to find 3 men standing in the road, their postures aggressive. He recognized them, farmers from the southern part of the valley, men who had fought in the war and returned with grudges that had not softened with time. Ellsworth, one of them called. His name was Robert Daniels, and he had a reputation for being quick to anger. We need to talk. Finneas closed the door behind him and stepped off the porch. What about? About the orc woman you have been sheltering. People are talking. Let them talk. It is not right, another man, Jacob Hale, said. You are a respected man in this community, a veteran. You should not be consorting with their kind. Their kind? Finneas kept his voice level. Elara Stonefield is here on legitimate legal business. I am helping her with a land claim. That is all. That is not all, Robert sneered. Word is you are going to testify for her family, help them take back land that should go to humans now. The land was legally theirs before the war. The treaty provisions allow for restitution. I am simply providing accurate testimony about the boundaries. You are choosing them over us, Jacob said. Over your own people. Finneas felt his temper rising, but he kept it in check. I am choosing fairness over prejudice. If you have a problem with that, take it up with the land office, not me. Robert stepped closer, his hand on the knife at his belt. Maybe we should take it up with the orc woman directly. Make it clear she is not welcome here. You will do no such thing. Finneas moved to block the path to the schoolhouse. If you threaten her, you threaten me, and I will not stand for it. You are outnumbered, Ellsworth, the third man, a younger farmer named Peter, said nervously. Just tell her to leave. Tell her to go back north and forget about the claim. No. For a moment, Finneas thought they might actually attack him. He was acutely aware of his damaged hand, of the fact that he was one man against three. But he held his ground, his good hand resting on the pommel of his own belt knife. Then the door behind him opened, and Elara stepped out. If you have a problem with me, say it to my face. Robert's eyes narrowed. You should not be here. This valley has no place for orcs anymore. This valley is my home, Elara said calmly. My family lived here for 2 generations before the war. We had a legal land grant, and we were driven off unjustly. I am exercising my right under the treaty to reclaim what is ours. The treaty is a piece of paper, Jacob spat. It does not change what you people did during the war. What we did. Elara's voice was sharp now. My family was not part of the conflict. We were farmers. We grew wheat and raised sheep. We were peaceful. And we were forced to leave because people like you decided we were the enemy based on nothing more than the color of our skin. You are all the same, Robert said. No, Finneas cut in. They are not. And I am telling you right now in front of witnesses that if you harm her or interfere with her legal claim, I will see you prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Am I clear? Robert glared at him, but after a long moment he stepped back. You are making a mistake, Ellsworth. You are going to regret siding with them. That is my decision to make. The 3 men left, their footsteps heavy on the road. Finneas watched until they were out of sight, then turned to Elara. You should not have come out. I was not going to hide while you faced them alone. Her jaw was set. I can defend myself. I know you can, but I would rather it did not come to that. They went back inside, and Finneas checked the locks on the doors and windows. He did not think Robert and his friends would come back tonight, but he was not taking chances. Does that happen often? Elara asked. Confrontations like that? Not often, but it happens. Finneas set his knife on the table. The war left scars on everyone. Some people deal with them better than others. And you? How do you deal with yours? The question caught him off guard. I do not think about them. That is not dealing with them. That is avoiding them. Finneas did not answer. He could feel the weight of her gaze, the expectation that he would open up, but he could not. The memories of the war were locked away in a part of himself he did not want to examine. Finneas, Elara said gently, you cannot help me reclaim my home if you are still running from what the war did to you. I am not running. Yes, you are. She moved closer, her voice soft but insistent. You said the war took your hearing and your hand, but it took more than that, did it not? It took something inside you, and you have been pretending it did not. Stop, he said, the word coming out more harshly than he intended. Just stop. Elara did, but the look in her eyes was one of understanding, not hurt. All right, but eventually you are going to have to face it. Because it is in the way. In the way of what? In the way of everything. They did not speak of it again that night, but Finneas lay awake on his bedroll long after Elara had gone to sleep, her words echoing in his mind. They left at dawn, riding horses Finneas had borrowed from Samuel. The journey to the county seat would take them through rolling farmland, then into the higher country where the forests grew thick and the air turned cool. Elara rode well, her seat comfortable and confident, and Finneas found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking. They stopped at midday to water the horses and eat a cold lunch of bread and cheese. The road was quiet, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the call of birds. "Tell me about your brother," Finneas said as they rested. "Tomas, what is he like? Serious? Deliberate?" "He thinks everything through 3 times before making a decision," Elara smiled. "He is nothing like me. What are you like?" "Impulsive, stubborn. I act first and consider the consequences later." "I remember that about you." They rode on, and as the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The fields gave way to forest, and the road narrowed, winding between ancient trees whose branches formed a canopy overhead. "This is where the border used to be," Elara said, looking around. "Between the human territories and the orc clans. During the war, this forest was a no-man's land. Neither side controlled it." Finneas nodded. He had fought in these woods, had seen men and orcs die among these trees. The memories pressed in on him, and he forced them back. "Did you ever fight here?" Elara asked. "Yes." "What was it like?" "I do not want to talk about it." Elara was silent for a moment, then said, "You are going to have to talk about it eventually." "Why?" Finneas's voice was tight. "Why do I have to talk about it? It is over. The war is done." "What good does it do to drag it all back up?" "Because it is not over for you," Elara said quietly. "It is still right there under the surface. I can see it every time someone mentions the war. You shut down, you pull away, you think you are hiding it, but you are not. I am fine. You are not." She reined in her horse, forcing him to stop as well. "Finneas, listen to me. I am not asking you to talk about it because I want to hurt you. I am asking because I need you to trust me. If we are going to move forward, if you are really going to wait for me, if this is going to be more than just a promise made by children, I need to know all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable." He stared at her, his chest tight. "What if the parts that are not acceptable are the only ones left? Then we deal with that together." Elara urged her horse closer until they were side by side. "But you have to let me in." Finneas closed his eyes. He could feel the panic rising, the old familiar clench of fear that came whenever he thought about the war. "I killed people, Elara. I followed orders, and I killed people who were just like you. Orcs who were fighting for their homes, for their families. I did not question it at the time. I did not think about it. I just did what I was told. And now you do think about it. Every day." His voice broke. "Every single day I think about the faces of the people I killed. I wonder if they had families, if they had children waiting for them. I wonder if one of them was someone you knew, someone you cared about. And I do not know how to live with that." Elara reached out and took his hand, the damaged one, holding it tightly. "You live with it by forgiving yourself. By acknowledging that you were a soldier in a war you did not start, doing what you thought was right at the time. You cannot change the past, Finneas, but you can choose how you move forward. I do not deserve forgiveness. That is not for you to decide, and it is not for me to give." She leaned closer, her eyes searching his. "But I can tell you this. The man I see now, the man who kept his promise and rebuilt a school and stood up to bullies to protect me, that man is worth knowing. Whatever he did in the war, whatever he thinks he is still worth knowing." Finneas felt tears on his face, hot and unexpected. He had not cried in years, had taught himself not to, but Elara's words broke something open inside him. He pulled his hand free and wiped his eyes, embarrassed and raw. "I am sorry," he managed. "Do not be." Elara's voice was fierce. "Do not you dare be sorry for feeling something." They sat there in the middle of the road, the horses shifting beneath them until Finneas could breathe again. Then they rode on, and though they did not speak, the silence between them felt different, less like a wall and more like a bridge. They reached the county seat on the evening of the third day, a sprawling town built around a central square. The land office was a squat stone building near the courthouse, and Elara's brother Tomas was waiting for them outside. Tomas Stonefield was taller than his sister, with the same green skin and dark eyes, but his features were broader, his tusks more prominent. He greeted Elara with a fierce hug, then turned to Finneas with a measuring look. "So you are the human my sister has been talking about for 12 years, he said. "I suppose I am," Finneas replied. Tomas extended his hand and Finneas shook it. The orc's grip was firm but not crushing. "Thank you for coming. We need your testimony if this claim is going to succeed." "I will do everything I can." They found lodging at a small inn that catered to travelers of all races. The innkeeper was a pragmatic woman who cared more about payment than prejudice, and she set them up with 2 rooms. That night, they reviewed the details of the claim one last time, Tomas asking pointed questions about landmarks and measurements while Elara took notes. "The hearing is tomorrow at noon," Tomas said. "The land officer will hear testimony from both sides, review any documents, and make a ruling. It should be straightforward, but be prepared for challenges. The current claimant to the land is a human farmer who was granted a provisional deed during the war. He is not going to give it up easily." "Who is he?" Finneas asked. "A man named Garrett Moss. He has been working the land for 8 years, built a house and a barn. He is going to argue that possession and improvement give him the stronger claim." Finneas frowned. But the land was not his to claim in the first place. The Stonefields had a legal grant, which was voided when they were displaced, Tomas said. "The provisional deeds issued during the war were meant to be temporary, but many have been treated as permanent. That is what we are fighting against." The hearing room was packed when they arrived the next day. Garrett Moss was there with his own supporters, a group of farmers who glared at Elara and Tomas as they took their seats. The land officer, a thin man with spectacles and a stern demeanor, called the session to order. "We are here to adjudicate the competing claims to the property formerly known as the Stonefield Grant," he began. "The petitioner, Elara Stonefield, is seeking restitution under the treaty provisions. The respondent, Garrett Moss, holds a provisional deed issued during the conflict. We will hear testimony from both parties and render a decision based on the evidence. Petitioner, you may begin." Tomas stood and presented the case methodically. He described the original land grant, the displacement of the Stonefield family, and the legal basis for the restitution claim. Then he called Finneas to testify. Finneas stood and walked to the front of the room. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him, hostile and curious in equal measure. The land officer gestured for him to sit. "State your name and occupation for the record," the officer said. "Finneas Ellsworth. I am the schoolmaster at the Ridgeview Schoolhouse, and you are here to provide testimony regarding the boundaries of the Stonefield property." "Yes, proceed." Finneas took a breath and began. He described his apprenticeship with his uncle, the boundary keeper, and the meticulous process by which every property line in the valley had been recorded. He recited the coordinates of the Stonefield grant from memory, described the landmarks, and drew a detailed map on the slate board provided. "The property begins at the split oak by the creek," he said, pointing to the map. "It runs north to the ridge where the white stones emerge from the hillside, west to the old Drover's Road, and east to the boundary marked by 3 cairns. The total acreage is 67 acres, with a southern exposure and a reliable spring. These details were recorded by my uncle in the official survey conducted 16 years ago, before the war began. "And you are certain of these details?" the land officer asked. "Absolutely certain. I memorized them as part of my training. I can provide additional specifics if needed: soil quality, water sources, gradient measurements." Garrett Moss's lawyer stood. "Objection. The witness is relying on memory alone. There are no surviving documents to corroborate his testimony." "The documents were destroyed during the war," Tomas interjected. "That is precisely why witness testimony is necessary." The land officer nodded. "The objection is noted, but the treaty provisions specifically allow for oral testimony in cases where records were lost due to the conflict." "Continue, Mr. Ellsworth." Finneas provided more details, answering questions from both the land officer and Moss's lawyer. The latter tried to trip him up with inconsistencies, but Finneas's memory held firm. He had lived with these details for so long that they were as familiar as his own name. Finally, the land officer called for Garrett Moss to testify. Moss was a stocky man in his 40s with calloused hands and a defensive posture. "I have been working that land for 8 years," he said. "I built a house, cleared fields, dug a well. I have made it productive. I was granted the deed by the territorial office during the war, and I have paid taxes on it every year since. That should count for something." "It does count," the land officer said. "But the question before us is whether your provisional deed supersedes the original grant held by the Stonefield family. Under the treaty, displaced families have the right to reclaim land that was taken during the conflict, provided they can prove their original claim. The testimony we have heard today strongly supports the Stonefield claim." Moss's lawyer tried to argue further, claiming that Finneas's testimony was biased because of his connection to Elara. But Tomas countered by pointing out that Finneas had no financial stake in the outcome and was providing factual information about boundaries, not opinions about ownership. After nearly 3 hours of testimony and argument, the land officer called for a recess. He returned an hour later with his decision. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that the Stonefield family has a valid claim to the property in question. The original land grant predates the provisional deed issued to Mr. Moss, and the treaty provisions support restitution in cases of displacement. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the petitioner. The land will be returned to the Stonefield family, effective immediately. Mr. Moss, you will have 90 days to vacate the property and remove any structures you have built. You may petition for compensation for improvements made, but that is a separate matter." The room erupted in noise. Moss's supporters shouted objections, while Elara and Tomas embraced, their faces shining with relief. Finneas sat quietly, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The land was theirs again. The promise he had made, the testimony he had given it, had mattered. Outside, Elara threw her arms around him, her joy unrestrained. "You did it. We did it." "You did it," Finneas corrected. "You had the courage to come back and fight for what was yours." Tomas clapped him on the shoulder. "Thank you, truly. Without your testimony, we would have had no case." They celebrated that night at the inn, a modest meal that felt like a feast. Tomas talked about bringing their family back, about the work that would need to be done to reclaim the land and make it productive again. Elara was quiet, her gaze often drifting to Finneas. When Tomas retired for the night, Elara and Finneas walked through the town square, the evening air cool and clear. "What happens now?" Finneas asked. "I go north to gather my family. That will take a few weeks. Then we return and start rebuilding. It will be hard work. Moss has let some of the land go fallow, and we will need to repair the irrigation channels, but it is ours. That is all that matters." And after that, Elara stopped walking and turned to face him. "After that, I would like to see if you meant what you said about waiting." About us. I meant it. Then when I come back, when my family is settled, I would like to see where this goes, if you are willing. Finneas took her hands in his. I have waited 12 years. I can wait a little longer. You will not have to wait long, Elara promised. I will be back before the first snow. They returned to the valley 3 days later, and Finneas resumed his teaching duties while Elara prepared for her journey north. On the morning she was set to leave, she stood with him in front of the schoolhouse, her pack slung over her shoulder. I will be back in 6 weeks, she said. I will be here. She kissed him then, a brief press of lips that was over almost before it began, but it left Finneas's heart pounding. Keep your promise, she said, smiling, always. He watched her ride away, her figure growing smaller on the road until she disappeared beyond the trees. Then he went back inside and looked at the ceiling beam, at their initials carved side by side. 6 weeks. He could wait 6 weeks. The weeks that followed were busy. Finneas threw himself into his teaching, working with the children on their reading and arithmetic. He also began reaching out to families in the valley, gauging interest in expanding the schoolhouse to include orc children when they returned. The responses were mixed. Some families, like Samuel Hart's, were supportive. Others, like Margaret Thorne's, were openly hostile. Robert Daniels and his friends made it clear they would pull their children out if orcs were allowed to attend. Finneas documented everything, keeping careful records of who supported the idea and who opposed it. He also began planning for the expansion itself: more desks, more books, possibly even a second teacher if the enrollment grew large enough. Samuel visited one afternoon, bringing a basket of apples from his orchard. I hear the Stonefield claim was successful. It was, Finneas said. Elara and her family will be returning in a few weeks, and you are planning to welcome orc children into the school. I am. Samuel set the basket down and regarded Finneas with a thoughtful expression. You know this is going to split the community. I know, but it is the right thing to do. Right does not always win, Finneas. Sometimes stubbornness and fear win instead. Then I will have to be more stubborn than they are, Samuel laughed. You have always had that in you. Even as a boy, you were stubborn. Your uncle used to complain about it. He taught me well. That he did. One evening, as Finneas was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a young woman holding a baby. She was thin and worn, her clothes patched and faded. Master Ellsworth, she said hesitantly. Yes, how can I help you? My name is Anna. I live on the eastern edge of the valley near the orc settlements. I heard you are planning to open the school to orc children. I am. Would you also teach human children who live near orcs? My daughter, she is only 3 now, but in a few years she will need schooling. The nearest school is a day's ride from where we live. But I heard the Stonefields are coming back, and I thought maybe, if there were more children in that area, you might consider opening a second schoolhouse. Finneas had not thought about a second location, but the idea took root immediately. How many families are in your area? A dozen, maybe more. Half human, half orc. We have learned to live together out there, away from the towns where people are still fighting old battles. But our children need education. Give me some time to think about it, Finneas said. But I promise I will consider it seriously. Anna thanked him and left, and Finneas stood in the doorway long after she was gone, turning the idea over in his mind. A second schoolhouse, serving a mixed community. It would be a statement, a tangible proof that orcs and humans could coexist peacefully. It would also be an enormous undertaking, but he had promised to wait, to keep a place for Elara to come home to. Maybe that place was not just the schoolhouse, but an entire community built on the idea that fairness and compassion mattered more than old grudges. 6 weeks to the day after Elara left, Finneas was outside chopping wood when he saw a line of wagons coming up the road. His heart leaped. He set down the axe and walked to the edge of the property, shading his eyes against the sun. The wagons were loaded with belongings, furniture, tools, crates of supplies, and at the front, riding a sturdy gray mare, was Elara. She saw him and urged the horse forward, closing the distance between them at a gallop. She dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, and Finneas caught her as she threw herself into his arms. "You are here," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am here," she confirmed. "And I brought everyone." The wagons pulled up, and Finneas was introduced to a flurry of people: Elara's brothers and their wives, nieces and nephews, cousins and friends. Tomas greeted him with a firm handshake, and the others followed suit, their expressions ranging from curious to cautiously friendly. "We are going to the land tomorrow to start setting up," Tomas explained. "But Elara wanted to stop here first." "I am glad she did," Finneas said. That evening, the Stonefield family made camp near the schoolhouse, their fires dotting the field like stars. Elara and Finneas walked away from the noise, following the path to the creek where they had played as children. "It feels like a dream," Elara said, "being back here. Seeing the valley again. I keep thinking I am going to wake up in the north and realize it was all in my head." "It is real," Finneas assured her. "You fought for it and you won." "We won," Elara corrected. "I could not have done it without you." They sat by the water, watching the moonlight ripple across the surface. Finneas told her about his plans for the school, about the families who had expressed interest in sending their children, about Anna's suggestion for a second location. "You have been busy," Elara said, impressed. "I wanted to make sure everything was ready when you came back." She leaned her head on his shoulder and they sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Elara said, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" "About what you said during the journey to the county seat. About the war, about what you did. I want you to know that I do not blame you. I never could. You were a soldier. You followed orders. That does not make you a bad person. It makes me someone who killed your people. It makes you someone who was caught in a war he did not start. There is a difference." She lifted her head to look at him. "And I want you to stop punishing yourself for it. You have done more to help my family than anyone. You kept your promise. You testified for us. You are building a school for our children. That is who you are, Finneas. Not the soldier you used to be." He wanted to believe her, wanted to let go of the guilt that had weighed on him for years. And sitting there beside her, with the sound of the creek and the warmth of her presence, he found that he could. Not all at once, not completely, but enough to breathe a little easier. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For coming back. For giving me a reason to keep going." Elara kissed him again, longer this time, and Finneas felt something inside him settle. This was real. She was real. And they had a future together. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity. The Stonefield family worked tirelessly to reclaim their land, clearing overgrown fields and repairing the damage done during their absence. Finneas helped when he could, bringing supplies and lending a hand with construction. The schoolhouse began to change as well. Word spread that Orc children would be welcomed, and families from the eastern settlements began making the journey to enroll their sons and daughters. Samuel helped Finneas expand the building, adding a second room and more desks. True to his word, Robert Daniels pulled his children from the school, along with a handful of other families. But for every family that left, 2 more arrived, drawn by the promise of an education that did not discriminate. On a clear autumn morning, the expanded schoolhouse opened its doors to a class of 23 children, 14 human, 9 orc. Finneas stood at the front of the room and looked at the sea of faces, some green and some not, all eager to learn. "Welcome," he said. This is a place of learning. Here we treat each other with respect, we work hard, and we support one another. It does not matter where you come from or what you look like. What matters is that you are here, ready to grow and discover. Let us begin. The first day was chaotic, as first days always were, but by the end of the week, the children had settled into a rhythm. Finneas watched them play together during recess, orc and human children running and laughing without a thought to the differences that divided their parents. It gave him hope. Elara visited often, sometimes bringing her nieces and nephews to see the school, sometimes just to spend time with Finneas. They fell into an easy companionship, their bond deepening with each passing day. One evening, as they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching the sun set, Elara said, "Do you remember what I asked you by the creek, about whether you regret waiting?" "You did not ask that," Finneas said. "You have never asked me if I regret it." "No, but I thought about asking. And I realized I already know the answer." "What answer is that?" "That you do not regret it, because regret would mean you wish things had gone differently, and you do not. You are exactly where you want to be." Finneas turned to her, taking her hand in his. "You are right. I do not regret a single moment, and I want to ask you something." Elara's eyes widened. "What?" Finneas stood and pulled her to her feet. Then, to her surprise, he knelt on the step below her so that they were nearly eye to eye. "Elara Stonefield, I have waited 12 years for you. I kept my promise, and now I want to make a new promise, one that will last the rest of our lives. Will you marry me?" Elara's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He stood and kissed her, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, to the promise they had made and the future they were building together. They were married in the spring, in a ceremony held on the land that had been reclaimed. Both human and orc families attended, a rare gathering that symbolized more than just a union between two people. It was a statement of hope, of the possibility that old wounds could heal and new bonds could be forged. Samuel officiated, his voice steady and warm as he spoke about loyalty and love. Tomas stood as Elara's witness, and a young farmer named Henry Carver, one of Finneas's former students, stood as his. When the ceremony was over and they were declared married, the celebration lasted long into the night. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and for a few hours, the divisions that had marked the valley for so long seemed to dissolve. Finneas and Elara moved into a small house on the Stonefield property, close enough to the schoolhouse that Finneas could walk to work each morning. They built a life together, one marked by hard work and quiet joy. The schoolhouse continued to grow. By the end of the second year, enrollment had doubled, and Finneas hired a second teacher, a young orc woman named Mara who had been trained in the northern settlements. The two of them worked side by side, creating a curriculum that honored both human and orc traditions. Anna's suggestion for a second schoolhouse came to fruition as well. With funding from the territorial government and support from the families in the eastern settlements, a new building was constructed, and Mara transferred there to lead it. The two schools became symbols of what was possible when people chose cooperation over conflict. Finneas and Elara's first child was born on a snowy winter evening, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green skin. They named him Alder, and he became the center of their world. A second son, Ashton, followed 2 years later, and then a third, Gideon, 2 years after that. The house that had once felt spacious became crowded and noisy, filled with the sounds of children playing and arguing and laughing. Finneas watched his sons grow, teaching them to read and write, to treat others with kindness, to question the world around them. He told them stories about their mother's courage, about the promise he had kept, about the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was hard. Elara was a fierce and loving mother, balancing the demands of raising 3 boys with her work helping other displaced families navigate the restitution process. She became a respected figure in the community, someone people turned to for advice and support. The valley changed around them. More orc families returned, reclaiming land and rebuilding lives. The initial resistance softened, though it never disappeared entirely. There were still those who clung to old prejudices, who saw orcs as outsiders or threats. But they were outnumbered by those who had learned to see past the surface, to recognize the shared humanity and orcness that connected them all. Years passed. The boys grew into young men, each carving out their own paths. Alder became a teacher like his father, taking over the eastern schoolhouse when Mara retired. Ashton trained as a surveyor, following in his uncle Tomas's footsteps. Gideon, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a blacksmith, his skill with metal earning him commissions from across the territory. Finneas and Elara grew older together, their hair graying, their steps slowing, but their bond as strong as ever. They sat on the porch of their home in the evenings, watching the sun set over the valley they had fought to reclaim, and they talked about the life they had built. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not come back?" Elara asked one evening. "No," Finneas said. "Because you did come back, that is all that matters." "But if I had not, then I would have kept waiting," he interrupted, "because I promised, and I keep my promises." Elara smiled and took his hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "You really are impossible." "So you have said." They sat in silence, the familiar comfort of each other's presence more than enough. The schoolhouse, visible from their porch, was lit from within, a beacon in the growing darkness. Inside, the next generation of children learned and grew, building on the foundation Finneas and Elara had laid. It was not a perfect world. There were still struggles, still conflicts, still people who chose fear over understanding. But it was better than it had been. And that, Finneas thought, was enough. One spring morning, decades after that first knock on the schoolhouse door, Finneas stood in front of a new class of students. His hands were gnarled now, his hearing worse, but his voice was still strong. "Welcome," he said, as he had said 1,000 times before. "This is a place of learning. Here we treat each other with respect, we work hard, and we support one another. It does not matter where you come from or what you look like. What matters is that you are here, ready to grow and discover." The children listened, some human, some orc, some with parents who had been enemies during the war. But they were not enemies. They were classmates, neighbors, friends. After the lesson, Finneas walked home slowly, his steps careful on the uneven ground. Elara was waiting for him on the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Good day," she asked. "Good day," he confirmed, settling into the chair beside her. They sat together, watching the light fade, and Finneas thought about the promise he had made so many years ago. He had kept it, and in keeping it, he had found a life richer and fuller than he could have imagined. "You promised you would wait for me," Elara said softly, as though reading his thoughts. "And I did," Finneas replied. "I kept every word." "I know," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I know." The stars began to emerge one by one, and the valley settled into the quiet peace of evening. And there, on the porch of the home they had built together, Finneas and Elara sat hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had created, the promises they had kept, and the love that had endured through war and distance and time. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.